Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are for us in the evening. And thank you, Rob, Mike, and Jason for joining us and spending your evening with us. My name is Aneri. I'm the founder of Web3 PMs, and it's a community to help people transition to Web3 as well as thrive in Web3 product roles. And we're super lucky today to be joined by the Alchemy product team. We have Rob Boyle, Jason Shaw, and Mike Garland with us today. And so to kick us off, why don't you each give us a fun fact?
Oh, interesting. About ourselves or fun fact in general?
Fun fact about yourselves, unless there's something that you are so interested in you want to share.
I mean, well, this is a random fun fact, probably interesting to nobody, but I am extremely unathletic, but I was a national championship competitor in paddle tennis.
Wow.
Purely because only 16 people signed up for the national championships. And so I made it by default. So
that's incredible. You got to find your niche and go for it. That's
exactly.
Awesome.
There's a lesson in there for sure.
How about you, Rob?
That is amazing. I don't think I can follow that up. That is really hard. Let's see. This is kind of cheating, but like, because this is kind of getting into the actual meat of the discussion, but I essentially knew nothing about Web3 before I took this job. I was like a complete noob. And basically one of my first questions to Nikhil was like, so is this blockchain thing a scam or not? Like, that was like my first question to him. But like, now I'm super into it, obviously, but knew pretty much nothing. The first thing I did was when I like got this offer and then went and read the Bitcoin white paper to figure out what I was getting myself into.
That's amazing. Motivation for us all. You don't need to be an expert to thrive in this space. And Jason?
Nice. Those are great fun facts. I think mine will be, so we had a company hackathon this past week, and I used our API to figure out that I think I have 17 crypto wallets and 136 NFTs, half of which apparently are spam NFTs, unfortunately, but that is my fun fact to contribute.
I guess you don't need to be a developer to get use out of Alchemy's products. That's awesome.
For sure.
Cool. Well, thank you all for joining. Would love if you could spend a few minutes each talking about your experience pre-Alchemy. You all have really incredible backgrounds before coming here. And as you kind of talk through that, like what was the crypto origin story? I know for Rob, it was after the job, but kind of what was like that moment where it clicked that this was something big and that you were super excited to work in? Jason, do you want to start?
Sure. So my background is mostly as a startup founder or in product management. I think the thing that's always drawn me in is if there's a big important problem and if I feel like I can have a unique imprint on trying to address it. And so, I ran an education company for about 7 years, a SaaS company for about 4 years, and then got drawn into Alchemy when I realized that, I guess to use Rob's words, it wasn't all a scam, and that there was something really important at the intersection of economic models, social freedom and mobility, creative expression happening in Web3 that I think we're still in the midst of figuring out. And so I always had a curiosity in it, going back probably like many folks on the call, 10 years and kind of speculating over time, keeping a foot in the space, but never really diving in. And then definitely with the pandemic, have an opportunity to dive into Solidity and smart contracts and realize that the application era had begun and couldn't, help myself and had to dive in full time.
That's awesome. Rob?
Hey, so I'll give you my standard quick bio. I started off as a software engineer, did that for a little while. Then I also was a startup founder, did a couple of startups for about 3 years. And then I went over to Facebook, or Meta now. That's when I made the engineering into product transition, learned a ton about product management at Facebook. A big fan of the product management org there. Spent way longer there than I expected to when I first joined. The last team I was on there was Facebook's developer platform. And that's when I really got sold on developer platforms, both as the type of product that I really love PMing and working on. And then also just the increasing power that they will have around the world. Like you're seeing now a ton of developer platform companies just becoming massive players in the space. They occupy this really cool layer in the technical stack. So I basically leaving Facebook, I was looking at platform companies like that. And so I started talking to Alchemy. And when I talked to Alchemy, I was like, oh, wow, this is a fundamental platform for blockchain. So if blockchain has a really strong future, I think Alchemy has a really strong future, given it being a premier developer platform in the space. So then the question was like, well, is blockchain a big thing? And then after I talked to Alchemy, I did a bunch of talking to people way smarter than myself, who I consider mentors, and all of them were like, if you have a chance to get into blockchain, you absolutely should, and convinced me on it. So my path was more via finding really strong developer platforms and then getting into I think the developer platform within blockchain.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's almost, obviously there's the risk still there on whether or not you can execute, but it's almost de-risked in the way that if you can execute well in the platform, if blockchain succeeds, you're kind of going to succeed whether or not it's an NFT or DeFi use case, whatever it is, you're kind of building for the whole ecosystem. That's a great way to think about it. And how about you, Mike?
Awesome. Yeah. Kind of atypical path to product in the blockchain space. So my background previous to Alchemy actually is all on the engineering side of the house. So I started out, I guess back in the day, studied CS at Stanford before I met Nelson. After that was an engineer at Palantir for a few years, left to become the technical co-founder of a YC-backed startup, and then ran engineering at a company that acquired us for a few years. I think the thing that got me into the blockchain space, I'm actually like kind of like Rob, where I hadn't paid a ton of attention to the space. I joined Alchemy almost 4 years ago now, so it was like late 2018, and hadn't paid much attention to it. Actually, our CEO is an old friend of mine and my freshman RA from back at Stanford, so I knew him and knew what he was doing at Alchemy. So I ended up spending like a couple of weeks just like binge reading as many white papers as I could, like learning about the space. And I think the thing that got me to take the leap and join Alchemy was, you know, I had this experience of going from Palantir to founding a startup and found the process of the kind of autonomy, but also the kind of impact you can have at a small company as an individual really addicting. And it seemed like there was this opportunity for a company to have an impact on the blockchain market because it's a startup market in the same way. And so it felt like there was this like literally compounding opportunity that made it kind of once in a lifetime, where I as an individual could join a small company, have a huge impact on that company, which can have a huge impact on that market. And the kind of like ceiling of the market from my 2 weeks of research felt really high. And so that plus, you know, knowing some of the team and having a lot of confidence in them and their ability to execute, to your point, Aneri, made me super excited to dive in. Yeah, in brief, that's my path here.
Yeah, that's great. And it's super representative of the people that we have in our community of a lot of Web 2 PMs looking to make the transition to Web 3, as well as a lot of engineers in the space looking just kind of interested in product. So that's going to hopefully be some amazing insight in today's panel. So let's shift to what is Alchemy. Obviously, Alchemy has been in the news a lot. If you're in the crypto space, has had an amazing kind of growth and traction and fundraising, but would love to hear from you kind of what is Alchemy, and then what do each of you work on at the company?
Yeah, maybe I could take a first stab at the what is Alchemy, and then Jason, Rob, you guys can fill in what I miss. So fundamentally, like, we are a blockchain developer platform. But what does that mean? So I guess backing out of it, we see that there have been, you know, 3 major shifts in technology over the years. The first being the development of the PC, the second being the internet, and our thesis is that the third major shift is blockchain. And what we've seen with each of those shifts is that, you know, there's this really promising technology, but it's relatively hard to work with. So in like the PC world, you have RAM, you have hard disks, you have CPU, but they're very hard to build end user facing applications directly on top of. Like building Word directly on RAM and hard disk and CPU would be almost impossibly hard. And so you need the operating system to come in and make it kind of feasible for developers to build the abstractions that they have the ambition to build using the underlying primitives. Same thing in the world of the internet. There is like so much for developers to build on, but the core protocols, like things we largely don't even spend time talking about these days, like FTP, TCP/IP, are really difficult to build on. You need the browser, you need Amazon Web Services to come in and abstract away a ton of that work and allow people to build, you know, Facebook, Twitter, Netflix. So similarly, you know, our thesis is this kind of platform layer needs to exist in the blockchain space as well. So building on Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polygon, all these chains directly is a pretty monumental task. So if you want to build a Web3 enabled social network or crypto payments for billions of people, like all these things that people have grand ambitions to do in the blockchain space, you really need something that comes in and makes it much easier for that end user, for those engineers and product people to be successful. And that's really like the core problem we're solving. Digging into how we actually do that, there's a bunch of different layers of our stack. We build out infrastructure to prevent people from having to run these like really idiosyncratic and hard to run nodes, they're called, on the different networks we support. We build out kind of new APIs that are abstractions for building with core concepts in Web3, like NFTs, tokens, these sorts of things that people kind of want to interact with instead of the raw smart contracts, and then developer tools. So helping you run these things successfully in production by bringing you a lot of the kind of tooling and abstractions you're used to in the Web2 space. So yeah, Rob, Jason, yeah, would love your guys' thoughts as well, but that's a quick intro.
I think you nailed it.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, and then I guess as far as what I work on, I'm mostly focused on two things. So our NFT API and our kind of broader NFT functionality. So we've noticed that this is like an extremely important vertical. Really want to help every kind of application there be successful, whether it's a marketplace, a creator, somebody who's doing a drop to 10,000 people. There's like some really significant infrastructure challenges, plus opportunities for us to build really powerful abstractions to make the building process easier. And another piece is we've expanded beyond our kind of initial blockchain that we knew and loved in Ethereum to a number of other chains. And so kind of have helped us think through and expand to those different ecosystems.
Awesome. Rob and Jason, what are you both working on at Alchemy?
Awesome. I'll jump right in. So interesting question. So I joined, worked on product for a little bit, and then in an almost cliche startup move, we had no one running recruiting at the time, and it was starting to become our biggest bottleneck. We raised a round, and we were like, oh, we need to hire a bunch of people who's doing recruiting, and there was no one. Similarly, I'd like started doing some product stuff. I was thinking around APIs you could build, and at the time, I think we had 5 or 6 engineers. And I was like, hey, when do we think we might have bandwidth to build some of this? And they're like, maybe in like a year or 2. And I was like, oh, so if I want to get products built, I need to hire people. So I went on this kind of side quest and was leading our recruiting for a while. Very, very startup thing to do. Back on product now. And I'm focused mostly on our developer ergonomics, like what it's like to interact with our APIs, what tools and SDKs we provide, basically what level of abstraction we allow developers to work at. The theory being that the more that we can raise that abstraction, the more they can focus on the things that are unique to their applications. We would love for Alchemy to almost fade into the background, such that you don't even think that much about it. You really focus just on like your use case and what you're building.
That's awesome. And yeah, PMs are wearing multiple hats always. And so that's even a recruiter. That's cool.
You do.
Totally. Yeah, there's a lot of hats that Mike and Rob are both being very humble, and I feel like they do a lot more than what they share, but hopefully that gives a bit of a concise view. And from my side, I'm mostly focused on growth. And so there are a number of growth products that we've wanted to build, as well as partnerships that we've formed. And so to Mike's point earlier on being one part of a very fast growing company in a very fast growing industry, there's a really unique opportunity right now for us to do things that can help accelerate the growth of that ecosystem. Not only are there PMs entering the space, but a lot of the engineers that want to go from being Web 2 engineers to Web 3 engineers, or somebody who is maybe halfway around the world who wants to start a DeFi protocol and be able to deploy and have us be a part of that. There's just a unique opportunity right now to create resources and products that accelerate the rate at which that happens. And so that's what I spend most of my time focused on.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure all 3 of you are being humble because the 3 of you kind of arming the whole product team is very impressive for a company kind of at the scale that Alchemy is at right now. So I think one thing, like, speaking about being on the developer layer, kind of building at that layer, you have a really interesting perspective of a lot of what's happening at the space and where the building is happening. So I'm curious, what are some of the areas and use cases that are growing the fastest or that you're most excited about that developers are also kind of building for right now?
Mike, I'm gonna call you out.
Cool. I can take a first stab again. Yeah, I think like I live and breathe NFTs every day, and so that's definitely the thing I am most excited about, and like I think have the closest kind of relationship to. I think that it's also the thing that has it kind of poked into the public consciousness, I think, the most. So it may feel like the most cliched answer, but I think even like working day to day with developers, I think the proliferation of ideas and the different things that are being built in the NFT space is really exciting. Like I think we're in this transition point from NFTs as PFPs and purely this like artistic expression to NFTs as utility to do all sorts of things. like really tapping into the fact that they are like really on-chain verification of ownership in this like very broad, powerful way. So I think that the scale of NFTs, like the kind of reach they have, I think is like there is certainly hype in kind of where it's at, but I think there is a lot of activity to back it up in terms of what developers are building, which is quite cool.
Yeah, and just to dive a little bit deeper on that, like NFTs have definitely been a huge thing that have probably brought a lot of people to our Web3 PMs community as well. What specifically are you seeing kind of developers build for? Like you talked about utility, like what types of utility are you seeing kind of a lot of excitement around right now?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that like I think unlocked my brain to the potential of NFTs is I talked to an application recently called Fabrica that basically does like property titles as NFTs. And I think the coolest thing about this is actually like their customer base has no idea that their product is backed by Ethereum and by NFTs. It just lets the traders who are interacting with these properties, like effectively doing high frequency trading of land, it lets them trade faster at lower cost because the blockchain can abstract away a lot of the things that like process and insurance and the things that blockchain intended to unseat are doing. So I think that's really cool. Like, I think that is an example of this like kind of broader push that we need to make as an ecosystem to, products that are powered by blockchain but aren't labeled blockchain or Web3 products or NFT products even. The same way that like we don't call things internet apps or like iPhone apps necessarily anymore. So I think it's that kind of push that's most exciting to me.
Yeah, and that's the goal, is that people shouldn't know or won't know in the future that blockchain is powering certain things, and so kind of making it as seamless as possible that the user is just interacting with products that work for them, regardless of what's powering it.
Totally.
Rob or Jason, any spaces that you're super excited about right now?
I would just build on some of what Mike shared there. I think where the fun part about working at Alchemy is that we work with all the chains, we work with all the verticals, and so in addition to NFTs, I think we're seeing a lot of exciting continued growth in, of course, the other two big pillars with DeFi and DAOs, but then also some of the more emerging spaces in terms of gaming, social, and identity and messaging. I think that in addition to the excitement that Mike conveyed around NFTs, I think personally, the idea around specifically social and messaging is something that I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that's exciting too. I think it's particularly exciting because in the same way NFTs started to make some of the value and the utility of blockchain more clear to people, because the concept of owning something on the internet was something that you could start to wrap your head around, even if maybe the price of an ape didn't necessarily make sense. Like the underlying primitives and concepts, I think, are things that people can connect with. So similarly, the idea that if your identity on the blockchain is something that you might actually have provenance over, or the idea that certain messages could be exchanged in a transparent fashion and there's new applications that can be built if you could trust that, I think that's starting to unlock a lot of new thinking, and it's still very, very early days in terms of product adoption. But I think that we're also starting to see, and again, that's the fun part about being an infrastructure company, is that you get to empower all these builders to build in new verticals and do things that we ourselves, even as product people, sometimes would have never imagined.
I don't have much to add. I think Mike and Jason covered most of the things I'm excited about. The only things I'll add are, I think gaming is interesting. I'm a big fan of games, and I think we're going to start to see, there's been some cool games, but I think we're on the cusp of seeing some really interesting applications as some of the traditional players get more into the space. And the other thing I'll call out is just scaling solutions, which I know isn't like an application, but I think that's going to unlock a bunch of things right now, like transaction throughput and gas fees just hold back, I think, a lot of really cool things like messaging and social. And so as more of these either layer ones or layer twos that unlock some of that come online, I just think that leads to a ton more innovation. We're going to see some of these spaces open up, which would be cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's like almost like an investor perspective. You're talking to people all the time and you're kind of seeing what's the latest in the space. And so that's very cool. Curious if you can kind of take us behind the scenes of like a product decision and some of the trade-offs that you have to make on a daily basis. So for example, like, do you kind of build out a use case more or kind of add more use cases, or kind of focusing on L1 versus L2? Like, what are some of those trade-offs that you have to make, especially with a team that is so lean and resourcing that's so lean at Alchemy?
Like, I feel like we should just have the pattern of making you answer everything first. I also do think the layer one, layer two conversation is probably No, I genuinely, I think that might be really interesting and relevant for this group if we could shed some light. And I think you'd be the best to speak to that.
Starting with L1s and L2s, Jason?
Perhaps, yeah. I think that might be really interesting, or other product decisions, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, maybe I can do that, and then we can kind of back out and you guys can talk about the broader product decisions. Yeah, the L1, L2 thing is really interesting, right? Because like basically all relevant usage right now exists on L1s, not to trivialize the things that L2s have done really successfully, but like very heavily weighted towards L1s because that's where the tooling exists. It's where people have been building for the longest amount of time. So there's also like a lot of bang for our buck in terms of building products that support L1s directly. But to Rob's point, there is this like really critical role that L2s are going to play in getting those L1s to be able to support use cases that folks are really excited about, like gaming, messaging, whatever it may be. So I think to some extent we kind of need to straddle both. We need to push forward our product that helps people today, but also kind of help them leverage L2s more quickly. So I almost see like L2 support through Alchemy as a core feature for our Ethereum developers, for instance. Like just like we can build a feature that lets them access NFTs more easily, we can also build a feature that lets them send transactions with lower gas more easily by building out really robust tooling for L2s. And so I think, my prediction would be that over time, through support from platforms like Alchemy, more and more usage will be moving on to the Optimism, Arbitrums, Starknets of the world. And so, I would guess more and more of our focus on the product side will move towards L2. But at the moment, it's keeping the lights on and pushing forward the product experience on L1s while making L2s an increasingly kind of attractive place for people to build.
And maybe I'll add a little bit too, where I'm sure Rob and Mike, you might have thoughts to add to this as well, but I think a couple other interesting things to call out would be, if we think about, for example, the developer platform, which endpoints are we adding to the APIs, as well as, Mike, I'm sure you would have some really great thoughts around the NFT API and some of the signal that you were hearing from the community there that helped lead to that decision. And I wanted to bring these up because I think what's really interesting about product decision making at a place like Alchemy is you simultaneously have to kind of like sense some of the trends, but also help create them, right? Because without some of these developer resources, it's actually really hard for people to be able to build, let's say, an NFT marketplace without the NFT API that Alchemy has. But there was something sort of brewing in the space, right? And this comes back to this discussion around the role of community in Web3, which may be different at times than from Web2, because Mike, Rob, myself, and our whole team constantly in Telegrams, in Discord, trying to, without losing your sanity, follow crypto Twitter and keep a pulse on things. And in such a nascent space, it's different than, let's say, when I was at Airbnb and the travel industry was very mature, kind of like, okay, let's build a better booking experience or a better way for hosts to know how to have higher quality homes. It's a much more mature industry, and kind of the model is more startup disrupting incumbent, whereas this is like startup disrupting itself, disrupting an industry, disrupting 10 other industries all at the same time. So I think that, conversation around which endpoints to add and debating, like, what are we hearing from our current customers versus what do we think, the ecosystem more broadly needs, even if they're not currently customers, or what are we hearing from the community around NFTs, is now the right time to pull the trigger on an API for that versus, let's say, double down on the core existing platform or invest in something else. And these are really interesting decisions that the team has had to make in the last, Mike's been with the company for 4 years. There have been many stages, but these are a couple more recent ones that I think are relevant.
Yeah, just to double down on something, I think a really important point that Jason made is actually like one of our secret sauces as a company, to spill it publicly, has been like how close we are to the ecosystem and our customers. Like we literally have hundreds and hundreds of direct Telegram chats with engineering teams in this space. We're like very active in speaking with developers even more broadly who aren't using our APIs. I think the intuition there is like, as a platform, there is no way we can know in depth about NFTs, DAOs, messaging. We just can't possibly keep up with the rate of change by doing research in a corner ourselves. And so by tapping into like the greatest resource in the ecosystem, which is the people who are building, we can learn much more quickly what's going to be effective at doing that. So actually, like even further, like I think we've done a really good job as an org to toot our own horn of like treating every customer interaction as an opportunity for product experience. Like our sales team, our customer success team, our engineers are like constantly talking to people in the space and our own customers and looping it back into our product strategy, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And like, even just checking out like the Alchemy Discord, it's people are, answering questions minutes after they're posted. And you have an amazing developer relations team as well that's just really out there with education always and explaining things clearly to people at all levels. So that's great. And Jason writes about this. He's an article about Web 2 to Web 3 PM, or the Web 3 PM guide, which we've linked a lot of times on our Twitter, but definitely check it out. And one of the kind of challenges for being a Web 3 PM is there's like an absence of data in a lot of cases, and like kind of direct connections with like building the moat. And so community is really what can help set companies apart. And it sounds like that's kind of the secret sauce for Alchemy. Awesome. So would love to kind of get a sense of how you stay focused on the right things and stay humble, and kind of like, given everything that has contributed to this success, why do you think that's happening? And how do you like ensure that you're still kind of focusing on the right things?
Just a quick comment on one part of that. And also before I forget, yes, a second shout out to our DevRel team, which I'm sure Mike and Rob would co-sign, but they are the heroes of Alchemy who do everything in terms of marketing and traditional DevRel and some engineering and some more. I think one of the words that you used in Aneri was how do you stay, or one of the questions you raised was like how to stay humble in this space. I do think that's one of the beauties of this space, is that it forces you to stay humble. And so, I think there's other parts of your question too that I'm sure Mike and Rob will have thoughts on, but I think that this was kind of the softball part of it, where I think that, whether it's like a 19-year-old who's running $1 billion protocol and you're like, man, what have I done today? Or whether it's just kind of, if you're not up on the latest, right, it's just so easy to be irrelevant very fast. Or if you're just, honestly, it's not even white paper sometimes. I'm just reading a Twitter thread and I can't comprehend half of what went on with an exploit. And like, I need to understand this more deeply. It's my job to understand this, but it's like this space forces you to learn something new every day. And that's cliche. I would say like 10 things new every day.
Yeah.
That's the difference, I think, with Web3 versus a lot of other spaces. So anyway, I think that the beauty of this is like, if you're not curious, if you're not a low ego person, if you're not a fast learner, it's a very self-selecting space, because I think most people would find it very stressful or very demoralizing to like constantly feel like they have to reinvent themselves and re-educate themselves on a daily or weekly basis. And I think fortunately for us, like we have a really stellar team where that's just like a cultural value that we like hire for and help develop. But yeah, it's impossible to not stay humble, I would say, in this space based on the dynamics.
Yeah, I've been off Twitter for 2 days and I've come to a whole new world. So I totally understand it. Anything to add, Rob or Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to pile on. I was going to, the second part of your question is so the first one, just agreed, staying humble here is not the problem. Like, I feel like you have to have a really strong growth mindset to work in Web3, because I feel dumb on like a daily basis, exactly as Jason says. I have to, and if that's demoralizing to you and not catalyzing, you're gonna have a bad time. So like, yeah, totally agree. On the how to stay focused on what's important, not to like go back to it, but I think our connection to developers that Mike called out is actually the secret sauce here too, of like the fact that we talk to multiple developers every day and are always talking to them about like what's hard, what'll be impactful, what'll help you unlock the most value. Like, that's how you stay grounded and focused on what is important, is staying immersed in like what your customer, in our case Web3 developers, like need and what they're trying to do and what's hard now versus later and how we can help them have the most leverage. Like, that's really what keeps us. If we didn't have that, we'd definitely be adrift.
Yeah. And I always say, as a PM, you have to always know what you don't know. And when you don't know stuff, you have to lean on the people who do. So yeah,
I think super well said by both Jason and Rob. The only thing I would add is like, actually, there's a beautiful intersection of the two parts of that question, Aneri, where like, I think part of the way we work on the right things is by staying humble about our own product roadmaps. Like, I would venture to say we shift and make changes to our product roadmap way more than like an average company outside of Web3 would be, because we need to admit that we're wrong pretty constantly. And so I think like the combo of, keeping a pulse on the ecosystem and using that to be like pretty adaptive instead of prescriptive about our product roadmaps is, I think, pretty helpful in this space.
That's awesome. You talked a little bit about the culture at Alchemy, Jason, you know, the culture of always learning. How would you kind of describe Alchemy's culture overall? And like, what are some examples of things that happen day to day that help contribute to that?
I'm happy to go first. Yeah, and then Mike, you've been I'll leave the burden of having to always go first. We'll briefly take off your shoulders. Yeah. So Alchemy is a very unusual company in my estimation. I'd be curious, Rob and Mike, your thoughts here in the best of ways. But I think what a couple characteristics that I think resemble the culture. So low ego, I mentioned this earlier, but literally our team just spans people with very, very different experiences, both functionally as well as sort of years of experience, but we're all just like one team. And it's really remarkable to see how everybody just like comes together and focuses on creating customer value, solving problems, like helping the ecosystem. It's unlike pretty much every other company larger than 10 people that I've ever worked at in that regard. And then the other quality I would call out is what I would perhaps venture to guess is Nikhil's one of his favorite words, which is hustle. It's just the rate at which things happen. Like a partnership can be formed in 2 hours and announced the next day, or a lot of the people who, myself included, who joined Alchemy, just cold emailed in and said, "Hey, I love what the company is doing. I want to be a part of it," and started trying to add value in some way. Now I remember, and Rob, this reminds me of your comment earlier, that I think I saw Nikhil post on Twitter that Alchemy was looking for recruiters. Little did I know I was hoping to help Rob like alleviate having to do the job of recruiting. But it was like, awesome, let's put together a list of recruiters and shoot that over. And I think, I don't know, one of the fun things about getting into Web3 from Web2 has just been like, I feel free, right? And the spirit of hustle that the company has to just like do something that is valuable that normally would probably, like, not to be too blunt, but like die in a planning document somewhere in a FANG company. And so I think there's a strong degree of hustle at Alchemy, which is a big part of what has made the company, in my estimation. And I've only been with the company for 6 months. Mike and Rob have both been here much longer. I think that really sets the company apart and is important given how fast the space moves.
Yeah, sounds like the perfect place for PMs who like to unblock and execute quickly.
I'll add one more. I tell this cultural story. I think this is a little bit more of an anecdote, but Alchemy is also a really close-knit company. I think that helps a ton, like very close-knit. We use the like term Alchemy family, like very unironically. We have this house in Malibu where everyone goes, but like a tangible story that I think speaks to that is when I joined, I think we were like 16, 17 people, and we started every Monday all hands by going through everyone at the company and like talking about what we did over the weekend, like just like 15, 30 seconds, like, hey, what'd you do this weekend? And it's super fun. You get to hear what everyone's up to. The people with kids hung out with their kids. The people who don't have kids are hungover. Like you kind of like, it's an amazing way to get to know people. But then we scaled and we got to like 20, 25 people. And there are a few of them like, okay, well, we can't all talk about our weekends like this doesn't scale. Let's figure out a new system. And Nikhil, our CEO, was like, no, I want to hear about everyone's weekend. And we're like, okay, fine, we'll keep doing it until it breaks. And we still do it. And he was completely right. He is like he understands culture at a deep level. And we're now at 50 plus people and we run through 50 weekends every Monday. And it's like the highlight of at least my week. I'm not sure, I won't speak for Jason and Mike, the other crew, but like, I love it. Like you feel super connected to all your coworkers. And the fact that I think that's a cultural marker of Alchemy, that we were going to push things like that some companies would throw out because they're like, oh, this isn't going to scale. We keep going and pushing on them like far longer than you would think, because they're so core to what we do. Same thing with the Telegram channels. I think most companies would be like, there's no way we can maintain a Telegram channel with all of our customers at this point. And we're like, nope, that's our secret to our success. We're going to keep doing it. But anyway, yeah, that's that. Hopefully that's a little brief window into Alchemy.
Yeah, I'm excited to check in a few years to see how you've scaled that weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Our Monday meetings were 6 hours.
Yeah, all of Monday is like weekend catch up, and then you get to work on Tuesday. I love it. Anything to add, Mike? I mean, you're in the Malibu Airbnb right now, so
I'm living it right now. No, I was taking mental notes because I've been trying to think of ways to like explain these cultural aspects of Alchemy, and I think Rob and Jason said it better than I ever have. That's great stuff.
That's awesome. Cool. And then we spoke a little bit about the space before we got to kind of transition into Web3 product management. Would love to just hear any quick bold predictions you have for 2022 and what your most, the boldest prediction you have for what we're going to see by the end of the year.
Okay, I'll let Mike and Rob think, and also just let myself be wrong so that they can be even more right than they would be otherwise. I'm just going to say two things that are not that controversial. One is that I personally believe, for anybody that's like read Nassim Taleb, like that crypto and Web3 is very like anti-fragile. Like it almost like doesn't matter what happens in the world, but like in the long run, it just keeps getting stronger, even with every crisis, with every crash, whatever. And so my estimation is that this year, next year, like there will continue to be like deeper lows, deeper fear, or whatever, but like it'll just keep coming back stronger. And maybe that is an unsurprising prediction, as clearly both an evangelist and a zealot if I'm working in the space. But that's one quick thing. And then two is that I also think that I've seen a flood of Web2 founders who have raised or entered the space in the last 6 months. And so I think that, and my hope, of course, is like with the Web3 values of decentralization and other aspects of it continue to be very strong. But my gut tells me that you're going to see like 2 or 3 unicorns pop up this year from founders that were working at Web2 like less than 12 months ago, because there's a ton of talent flooding into the space. And I think they're learning and unlearning at a very fast pace.
I love it. It's on the record now. Immutable.
That's awesome. Piggyback on that, maybe more like breadth than depth. I think the talent entering the space thing, I think, is huge, both as a trend and I think the impact on the space. I think my bold prediction would be something like, like every PM, certainly everyone on this call will have like a very close friend or family member who is working in the Web3 space by the end of the year. Because I think like the rate at which talent jumps into the space is going to be compounding as more and more cool things happen. Also, we're seeing this like really cool entrance of Web2 companies like Adobe and Shopify who we're working with, building real products in the Web3 space. So I think that's going to happen before we know it.
Yeah, and I'll just say as a goal for the community, maybe everyone on this call is working in Web3 at the end of this year. So they'll certainly know someone in the space. How about you, Rob?
Mine, one of them is Mike's. Like, I think we're going to see an explosion of Web2 companies. I think every companies that you can think of is going to have a Web3 product at some point of some kind. The other one, this is a little bit of a niche one, but going back to my scaling solution thing, I think this is going to be the year that those really break out. I think in 2023, we're going to look back and be like, remember when we cared about gas fees? Like, remember those? Like, I think those are going to start to get, I might be off by a year or two, but like I had inkling that this might be the year we kind of break free of that.
That's exciting for us all. Hope that one comes true. Awesome. So let's shift a little bit more about product management. We talked about the unlearning that has to happen, especially with this huge talent wave that is coming from Web2. What is the type of Web2 unlearning that needs to happen? And maybe to make it more tangible, like what are some decisions that would be made in Web2 that wouldn't be made in Web3?
Just mention two quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to defer to you, given that I was not a PM
please.
in the Web2 world. So I think, I think you and Rob are way better equipped to answer this question.
All right. Well, I look forward to your eventual answer because I'm sure you have something wonderful to say. But what I'll start with is, so a couple examples, and I think this is literally the type of thing where it's kind of asking like, tell me about a data-driven decision that you made like in the Web2 world. Is like, there's literally no end to the list, in my opinion. So number one, a good example, Rob was mentioning the Telegram channels or the way the company is being built to like not always focus on scale. I do think that there is a unique sense of like, do things that are super high quality, even if they don't scale, and we'll figure it out. And like, I think that that'll continue to be the case, at least for Alchemy. And I think that that's really important. And I think it's true of a lot of teams in Web3. And I think two, this is probably a more clear point of view on this. Like, I think we constantly prioritize things that are good for the ecosystem, even if they're not immediately obvious from a metric standpoint or good for short-term revenue gains. I think there are a lot of companies that like to say that that's what they're doing. I mean, I worked at Amazon. Amazon's famous for talking about long-term thinking and investments that are going to pay off. But I think the degree to which that happens in Web3 is just completely different. And the culture within organizations that prioritize that and hold teams accountable to actually make decisions like that, I think is radically different, which kind of gets at some of the, I think Chris Dixon has often said kind of like the, like, can't be evil versus don't be evil. And I think that there's a lot of like must be good type of things happening in Web3.
That's awesome. It sounds very freeing, that kind of idea of shipping something because of the value it provides or because you think that it could be right, regardless of kind of having to pay attention to some top line metrics.
I'll call it one thing. This is an interesting observation on Web2. Like a lot of Web2 companies, unless you're a SaaS business, and then it's a little bit different. Like you divorce monetization from traction a little bit. Like Facebook is a very classic example, right? Where it just like, it doesn't even think really about monetization and it like grows its user base and then pick something very orthogonal, like, okay, it's time to monetize. Let's build out an ads product. And that works very well. And like, those don't always go fit together. Startups will say like, we're not even thinking about monetization now. We're working on user product market fit and traction. I feel like a lot of the Web3 companies I've seen, because the economics are so easily accessible and there's so many different monetization models available that weren't available before, they think about that way sooner and it's baked into the core of the products a lot more, which I don't necessarily have a value judgment on it, but it's kind of forced every PM to be a bit more of an economist. Like when I was building products at FB, I didn't think about monetization at all. Like really, I got to not think about that. And in Web3, I feel like I have to think about tokenomics and like monetization models. They're just like a little bit more naturally part of the product, which is actually pretty fun because you can kind of like, you get to move between economic models and product market fit and tools and consumer products a lot more nimbly, but they're much more intertwined than I found in Web2 product development.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's kind of like, there's a financial component to most transactions. Yeah, Mike, would love to hear your thoughts and kind of also touch on being an engineer moving into product and some things that have helped you be a stronger PM because of that background.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, yeah, so for those who joined the call after our intros, so I had actually never been a PM previous to Alchemy. It was on the engineering side, I'd been a founder, which I guess is the closest to product. But even was hired at Alchemy initially as an engineer, and we were all engineers at the time. So as soon as we needed somebody to think about product, that's kind of when I raised my hand and moved over. I think honestly, like in name, Rob, Jason, and I are the product managers. But I think one of the cool things still about Web3 is like, it is very technical. A lot of the things that even the builders on top of us are dealing with are very technical problems. And I think a lot of the greatest product insights that we have come from either engineers as customers or our own engineers who have like a lot of insight into how the space can be built in a really effective way. I think it's really powerful. It's also worth considering that like, you know, long-term, the space needs to be more and more accessible to people with lower and lower technical abilities. But I think particularly like the fact that I had the opportunity with no previous product experience, only like engineering expertise to come in and be a relatively effective product person, I think is a kind of cool and unique part about where Web3 is at right now. Yeah.
Awesome. So that brings me to my last question before we open it up for audience Q&A. What specifically do you look for when hiring PMs for Alchemy? And kind of a second part is, what are those like non-PM roles that are good stepping stones for just PM, like for product and in Web3 generally? And I know a lot of people in our community kind of across the spectrum, and a lot of people don't have product background, and typically in Web2, you know, you need to be a PM to be a PM. What are the types of roles that in Web3 might open the door for product roles, even if you don't have any product experience? And Rob, I'm going to volunteer you as a former.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to leave it out, but yeah. I having worked on a, so I think in terms of valuable experiences, like we really value scrappiness and like early stage experience. That, as we've talked about, the space moves really fast. You have to be very agile. You have to be very adaptable and very humble. And I think a lot of that gets drilled into you when you're at earlier stage companies. So that's one thing that we really value. We really like that. We like seeing people who are on small teams, who have founded something, who have that scrappiness. The second thing I think that's really powerful is a little bit of a technical background is very helpful. As Mike said, like a lot of ideas come out of engineering. So the more technical your background or more technical your exposure, at least, like that's really helpful. And then the third thing I'll call out is being embedded in the ecosystem. The other thing that I think we touched on multiple times was like a key to our success is being really plugged in with our customers and with the space. And so people who have already done that with Web3, it doesn't mean they've done it forever, but like they have spent the last few months and really gotten involved and kind of like have gotten in depth with it. I think that gives them a solid an edge, is something that we really like seeing.
As far as the roles piece, Aneri, I think I think there are a bunch of answers to that question. I think maybe the most unique to Web3 in my mind is like founding something and building, even if it's not like being a traditional founder, like getting your hands dirty and building a product in the Web3 space. I think a couple of the things about Web3 that make it so unique is like, one of the, I think, most day-to-day fun parts about building in this space is like everyone is accessible. Like every builder, Twitter personality, like reach out to them, and I would say 90% chance with some persistence, you'll be able to like get on the phone or a Zoom and chat with them and get their opinion, get them to use your product. Like when we were starting out, I think that was one of the things that helped us got off the ground is just everybody is so collaborative and so transparent about what they're working on. Is it's a really welcoming space for builders. I think practically speaking too, like there are grants to be had all over the place. Like the Solana ecosystem, Polygon ecosystem, Arbitrum, like a lot of these places are really looking for builders to come in and build great things. And so there's also ways to de-risk it to come in and be a builder. And as Rob mentioned, like we're always looking for people that have that kind of hands-on engineering experience and expertise. It forces you to think about product in the Web3 world in this first-class way. Like we are always trying to do like hackathons like we did last week where we force ourselves to build products in Web3 as a way of getting this experience even on the product team. So I think it's a good match of a lot of the things that make for successful PMs in a pretty attainable way.
And you don't necessarily even have to be technical, like an engineer
Totally.
to be a builder. Like but like we see people who make NFT collections and projects that are super cool and they're not technical at all. They partner with technical people or use some of the platforms that are available today. But like building something that people find valuable and learn and like going through that exercise in Web3 is very accessible.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost a level playing field in some ways because everyone's learning and everyone's kind of like starting anew. Awesome. Okay, thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So if you have a question, let's raise your hand, and we have Chitana with a question.
Hi, hey, thank you for a great session, all of you. And my question is in particular to the last few questions Aneri asked you guys around, hey, most of the decisions are made based on data because you're so close to the community and bring the data back. But sometimes in terms of innovation, let's say L1, L2, right? I think L2 is still in the works, but L1 is where a lot of work is happening. But without the data, how are you guys making decision is the area that I'm kind of interested in to learn. Like if you don't have data, like unless bringing that from the community, but there are some things that you want to innovate and give that to the users, not just bring from the data and build those features, right? So what are some of those, I would say?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like in the L1, L2 case, maybe is like a case study on this. I think we saw a trend where like people weren't necessarily asking for like, hey, can you support this specific L2? It wasn't as explicit as that. We just heard like literally everybody building on Ethereum saying, I can't build the product I want or get the users I want because things are too expensive and too slow. And so by like listening to those folks and then also listening to people who are building potential solutions, we were able to connect the dots and say, oh, hey, L2s are actually a great solution for this like big, extremely scary problem for the ecosystem. And we're able to sort through like who are the right partners and what are the right products to build to solve that for users. So I think to some extent, like translation and connecting the dots and paying attention to like the aggregated feedback you're getting is sometimes like the closest to data that we have to deal with, if that makes sense.
No, totally makes sense. And I think where I was getting at is want versus need. from the community or the user segment demographic that you're serving with the products that you're building on the platform on Alchemy is what I was getting at. Like, how do you basically differentiate and get that a sense through aggregation that you mentioned, right? Like not just a direct signal, but also indirect signal, like what we should be providing them with. So yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. Next up.
Hey guys, my name's Theo. Again, thank you so much for the session. This was really cool. This is like a personal question. It's not really technical, and any of you could take it. I'm just curious to hear what like Web2 companies would you like to see embrace Web3 application, and like how? Like what protocols would you like to see in these?
I have a very potentially boring answer. There's an amazing Mark Cuban thread on why all event tickets should be NFTs. And it just makes so much sense. It is basically just like completely obvious. So like, this may be boring, but I would love Ticketmaster to just become a blockchain company and or Eventbrite or one of these and just shift all. I think it would be super cool. Yeah, so I would love just that industry to move over.
Awesome. Any more quick answers? We have tons of questions, so I want to make sure we get through a lot, but
Yeah, I would say the only other one I would tap on is I know Twitter has done some like initial stuff in the blockchain space. I think like some combo of that plus what the Aave team is working on with their Lens protocol for like decentralized social networks. Like I think seeing the Web2 giants of social media adopt that like really fundamental change at the protocol level for how they work would be unbelievably exciting. Like I think that would be super cool. And like fundamentally change a lot of the biggest things that are difficult to swallow about the internet today.
yeah.
And last quick answers. Sorry, Aneri, if I may. Like I do think also Web2 finance, like TradFi, and moving over and starting, because there's all this promise of economic freedom and like people in emerging markets being able to use and benefit from crypto, but I think it's still very, very early days. So that's maybe a third category to round out what I think Mike and Rob had already said.
Yeah, awesome. And I was just going to add that like Twitter and Discord are like kind of power so much of our Web3 interactions now. And so like seeing them lean into it more would be exciting. Leslie.
Hey, everyone. Hey, thanks for the opportunity for me to ask the question. So I'm currently a PM at a crypto infrastructure focused SaaS company. So I would say between Web3 and Web2, it's leaning towards more Web2. So my question, but I have a lot of personal interest in diving into the technical details. And my question is taking Chaitana's question a step further. How do you prioritize solutions that fit into a roadmap specific for, technologies happening in layer 2? So I see that Alchemy recently had a partnership launch with Darknet. We had Polygon, all the solutions implemented. How do you evaluate when it comes to like Zcaroa, Plasma, etc.? What metrics do you consider? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that one to me almost feels like almost the easiest call to make without a ton of metrics, just because if you spend some time as a platform in the blockchain space like we have, you like very quickly realize how big the scaling constraints matter to builders day over day. So I think a little bit our thesis is like the thing that layer 2s are trying to accomplish needs to happen for builders to be successful long term and for new use cases to be unlocked. And so, yeah, I think it was more that like almost the same answer, not to go back to it, but like the aggregated feedback from developers about like the need for faster transactions and lower gas fees, and being able to translate that to a problem that L2s were effectively solving. They're also like, it's worth mentioning, there are differences between the different L2s. Like that's probably a more nuanced conversation than we'd have time to get into today, but so that there are reasons why people would choose one L2 over another. And so that's why we've supported kind of multiple in the name of making those solutions successful.
Awesome. Thanks. Bojana.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to ask the questions. I actually have two. One, are there any notable open source projects in the space that you've needed to interface with or leverage, or that you see are a really good fit for this space?
Go ahead, Rob.
We might say the same one. We'll find out in a second. I think the SDK has been really clutch, like ethers.js and web3.js. Like, I think those are basically the interface that most developers actually use to interface with the blockchain. So I think so far those are pretty critical.
Cool. Yeah, what I was actually going to say is like so much stuff is open source, like because everything is public on the blockchain and like people's code lives publicly on the chain, and because like composability is one of the most important aspects of blockchain, like being able to take what somebody built and use it for something they never imagined. I think like way more things than you would expect are open source. Like I think the space is like radically open source in that way. And so there's a ton of stuff. Like almost everybody we work with has at least some component of what they do or everything they do open source. What I would call out, like ENS stands out as one where like we've been able to build product experiences directly with ENS, as I think a lot of people in the space have. This kind of like DNS equivalent, but for blockchain addresses, which I think has been like a simple idea, but extremely effective at making things possible in the Web3 space.
Awesome. I know you had another question, but we have like a lot of questions right now. So if it's okay with you, can we move to Patrick and maybe you can kind of reach out on Twitter or something to. Awesome. Patrick.
Hey everyone. So I'm currently looking into moving into Web3. I'd like to get your thoughts on either going deep into one type of Web3 application, let's say like NFTs, or going broadly across many types of applications. I feel like to me that is working Alchemy, where you can learn a lot. My background is that I am quite new to Web3. I've like 4 months, but I spent the last 3 months deep into NFTs. So I'm trying to think about, should I be applying more to like NFT marketplaces, or do I want to work at infrastructure companies where I can learn all about Web3?
So I just think Jason would have a really good answer to this because he did a really in-depth search, but I will say you're a little biased. We are talking to 3 infrastructure PMs. So like take everything we say with a bit of a grain of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say to that is, if you've been diving deep into NFTs, and I think this extrapolates to anybody else on the call who maybe feels drawn by DAOs and communities, or maybe you have a finance background and find DeFi really interesting. Like if you actually have that, I do think that that's a huge asset. And if you've been spending 3 out of the 4 months going really deep on NFTs, chances are you're probably in the top 1% of people in the world who know about NFTs, and you'd be probably the best PM in the world to be going and doing something for NFTs. So I think it comes back to your own interest and passion, and maybe Rob, Mike, and myself all have kind of more generalized interests, and it's more at the infrastructure layer and it's across each area. But I think the space needs really deep domain experts, and you'd be an exceptional, I think you would stand out a lot if you actually knew a lot more than the average person who can probably name OpenSea and could probably name some NFT collections and maybe looked at like 721 and 1155, but doesn't really understand it deeply. So like most decisions, I think it should be guided by your personal interests and context. But if there is an area that you feel a draw towards, my generic advice would be to like follow that and go deep, because I think you'll stand apart from a lot of other people.
Awesome advice. George.
Hey, thanks a lot for the opportunity to ask a question. So my question is more about like, so for college new grads, I'm just kind of in my senior year, and my long-term objective is to be a PM in the space. But when I look for like more established companies like Alchemy's, it seems that like a lot of the job postings requires insane amount of years of experience, like 4 to 6 years and things like that. And Jason and Mike, like you two both mentioned that like it's a pretty open playing field, and I've also been involved with a lot of projects and a lot of DAOs. And so I'm just wondering, like, for when you guys are looking for like new grad candidates, right? What are you looking for? And beyond the general attributes, what level of achievements you guys kind of need to see, or for you guys to be comfortable with, okay, this is someone we can hire even if without all those years of experience.
I'll say a couple quick things, and then Mike and Rob, feel free, obviously. So a couple things. First, I would say I actually think a lot of people who are new grads, despite our job posting, and we've been talking about this internally, and this comes back to, I think, Rob's point earlier about like constantly reassessing and adjusting, like are actually way better suited to be successful Web3 PMs than, well, I'll just speak for myself. I won't put Rob or Mike on blast, but like the speed of unlearning, like the plasticity, the curiosity, the hustle, like just tends to be stronger when, let's say, you're a new grad than somebody who can like rest on their laurels and say like, I was at these 3 companies that IPO'd and I'm kind of boring and calcified in my career. Like, again, sorry to be blunt, but I think that there is that strength. I think the flip side of the problem is that a lot of people get judged by how they appear on paper. So if your LinkedIn can't demonstrate a Web3 interest, or if somebody has had roles that aren't product roles, it's very quick. It's very easy to quickly dismiss those names, just being fully transparent about the recruiting process sometimes. So my suggestion would be like, know that, have confidence in your background, but there has to be a way to break through, because again, speaking for Mike and Rob here a little bit, but like everybody's working these insane hours and like constantly context switching, that it takes something to really get somebody's attention. And so I think that things like our job postings are filters sometimes, but they sometimes have a lot of false negatives as a result. And so it'd be in everybody's best interest if we didn't have those false negatives. So what I would say, George, is just, I think actually in many cases, your background might be very well suited. The question is, how do you break through? And I think this comes back to Mike and Rob's points earlier about reaching out in the community, establishing a name. One other brief anecdote, I know we're short on time. Like we had briefly like paused our intern program, but then we also noticed there were a bunch of people posting these incredible Twitter threads that were deeply insightful about DeFi and NFTs. And then we started saying like, maybe we should have some interns, and like started bringing them into the fold. And now they're like producing content for Alchemy and doing other work. And it's great for everybody involved. So anyway, the point is that like none of these assumptions are meant to be hardened. And I think that if I were you, I'd have a lot of confidence in yourself and just kind of hustle your way into these organizations, despite things that might show up in a job posting that are probably just there as a guidepost, but not actually a strict requirement.
Yeah, I love that, living, breathing Alchemy's hustle in your response. So we're at time. I'm going to just wrap it up, and then maybe you can reach out to them on Twitter or yeah. So sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but thank you everyone for spending your evening with us, and especially Mike, Rob, and Jason for this incredibly inspiring and insightful session. Kind of, if you guys want to reach out to them on Twitter, tweet at them, kind of tweet your favorite insights from this and tag them. Would love to see it. And until next time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for hosting, Aneri, and everybody for attending.
Absolutely. It was a blast. Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.